Commander Jake Morrison walked through the cold metal halls of Titan 7 space station. His boots made soft sounds on the floor as he moved toward the communication room. The station floated in the dark space between Earth and Mars, watching for signals from faraway places. Jake had been doing this job for 10 years, and he had never seen anything like what was happening today. Lieutenant Amy Patterson sat at her desk with her eyes wide. She had been staring at the same screen for 3 hours. Her fingers moved fast over the buttons as she tried to understand what she was seeing. The signal kept coming and coming, never stopping, never changing. It was like someone far away was screaming for help, but no one could hear them. Jake walked up behind Amy and looked at her screen. The numbers and lines meant nothing to most people, but Jake could read them like a book. What he saw made his heart beat faster. The signal was coming from very far away, farther than any human ship had ever gone. It was coming from a place called Kepler 442, a star system that was 1,200 light-years from Earth. Amy turned around in her chair and looked at Jake. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking just a little bit. She had found something in the signal that scared her. The message was being sent in 12 different languages, and 3 of them were human languages: English, Spanish, and Chinese. But no human ship had ever gone that far into space. The message was simple, but it made Jake feel cold inside. Someone was asking for help. They said they were being attacked by ships they did not know. They said there were regular people on their ship, not soldiers. They were asking anyone who could hear them to please help them. Jake picked up his communication device and called Admiral Lisa Carter. She was the person in charge of all the space stations that watched for signals. She was tough and smart, and she had been fighting in space longer than anyone else. When Jake told her about the signal, she said she would come to Titan 7 right away. Admiral Carter arrived 2 hours later. She was a small woman with gray hair and eyes that looked like they had seen too much fighting. She walked into the communication room and looked at the screen where the signal was still coming in. Amy showed her all the information they had found. The signal was definitely coming from Kepler 442. The ship that was sending it was big, much bigger than any warship Earth had ever built. It looked like a ship that was made to carry thousands of people from one place to another. But the scary part was that there were 17 other ships around it, ships that were shooting at it with weapons that Earth had never seen before. Admiral Carter stood very still for a long time, looking at all the information. Jake could see that she was thinking hard about something. Finally, she turned around and looked at Jake and Amy. She asked how many ships Earth could send to help. Jake told her that they could get a small group of fast ships there in 2 days, if they used their best engines. But Admiral Carter shook her head. She said that regular ships and regular soldiers would not be enough for this job. Jake understood what she meant. There was only one group of people who could handle a situation like this. They called them the Death Squadron, but that was not their real name. Their real name was Special Operations Unit 7, but everyone who knew about them called them the Wolves. The Death Squadron was made up of soldiers who had been kicked out of the regular army for being too violent. These were men and women who fought too hard, who scared their own teammates, who did things in battle that regular soldiers were not supposed to do. The army had tried to get rid of them, but Admiral Carter had a different idea. She put them all together in one group and sent them to deal with problems that regular soldiers could not handle. The leader of the Death Squadron was Colonel Rick Hayes. He was a man who had been fighting since he was 18 years old. He had scars on his face and arms from battles that most people did not even know had happened. Other soldiers were afraid of him, but he was the best at what he did. When the army needed someone to go into a situation where mercy would get people killed, they sent Rick Hayes and his team. Admiral Carter picked up her communication device and made a call. She spoke quietly, but Jake could hear some of what she said. She was talking to someone about the signal and about sending the Death Squadron to Kepler 442. She said that if there were really human civilians being attacked by alien ships, then Earth needed to send its most dangerous people to help them. After she finished her call, Admiral Carter turned back to Jake and Amy. She told them to keep monitoring the signal and to record everything they could about the alien ships. She said that in 48 hours, the Death Squadron would be at Kepler 442, and they would find out exactly what was happening there. Jake watched Admiral Carter leave the communication room. He had a feeling that whatever was happening at Kepler 442 was going to change everything. Humanity had always wondered if there was other life in the universe. Now they knew there was, and it was trying to kill humans. But the aliens had made one big mistake. They had asked for help in human languages. And now Earth's most dangerous soldiers were coming to answer that call. Colonel Rick Hayes stood on the bridge of the UES Vengeance as the ship dropped out of hyperspace. The journey from Earth had taken 47 hours, and every minute of it had been spent planning for war. Rick was not a tall man, but everyone on the ship was afraid of him. He had killed more enemies than anyone else in the Earth military, and he had done it with his bare hands more times than anyone wanted to count. The bridge was dark except for the blue light from the computer screens. Captain Nicole Webb sat at the sensor station, her fingers moving fast over the controls as she scanned the area around them. She had been with the Death Squadron for 5 years, and she was the best at finding enemy ships, even when they were trying to hide. Nicole looked up from her screen and her face was serious. She told Rick that there were 17 alien ships surrounding one big ship that looked like it was carrying civilians. The alien ships were shooting energy weapons at the big ship, and parts of it were breaking off and floating away in space. Rick walked over to look at Nicole's screen. The alien ships were smaller than the Vengeance, but they moved fast, and they had weapons that could punch holes through metal like it was paper. The big ship they were attacking was losing pieces every few minutes. If the Death Squadron did not act soon, everyone on that ship was going to die. Major Chris Kelly walked up next to Rick. Chris was Rick's second in command, and he was famous for being able to blow up anything with the right explosives. He had been kicked out of the regular army for destroying an entire enemy base when he was only supposed to take out one building. The Death Squadron was the perfect place for someone like Chris. Chris looked at the alien ships on the screen and smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the kind of smile that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. He told Rick that the odds were 17-1 against them, which he said was pretty good for a Wednesday. Sergeant Danny Brooks was already putting on his combat armor in the back of the bridge. Danny loved explosives even more than Chris did. He had been kicked out of the army for trying to solve every problem with bombs. His idea of being careful was using smaller bombs. He asked Rick if he could board the alien ships directly and blow them up from the inside. Rick told Danny to wait. First, they were going to announce themselves properly. Rick walked over to the communication panel and turned on the general channel, so that all the ships in the area could hear him. His voice was calm and cold when he spoke. He told the alien ships that this was Colonel Rick Hayes of the Human Death Squadron. He gave them 30 seconds to stop attacking the civilian ship and leave the area. If they did not leave, he said he would show them why Earth did not negotiate with pirates. The aliens answered back in broken English. Their voices sounded strange, like they were not used to making human sounds. They said that humans were impossible. They said that humanity was primitive and could not threaten the Fourth Empire. They said that humans were still stuck on their home planet and could not travel between the stars. Rick smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made even his own soldiers step back. He turned to Lieutenant Tom Garcia, who was sitting at the weapons station. Tom had been kicked out of the regular army for being too eager to shoot first and ask questions later. Rick told Tom to show the aliens what primitive looked like. Tom's fingers danced over the weapon controls, and the Vengeance unleashed hell. The ship's experimental plasma cannons fired bolts of energy that were hotter than the surface of a star. 3 alien ships disappeared in bright flashes of light, turned into clouds of glowing gas that spread out into space. The remaining alien ships tried to run away, but the Death Squadron had brought more than just the Vengeance. Captain Steve Martinez's stealth ship Reaper appeared behind the alien formation like a ghost materializing out of darkness. Steve had been kicked out of the regular army for breaking too many rules about how to fight enemies, but his rules worked better than the official ones. Major Chris Kelly's assault ship Havoc came out from behind a nearby moon where it had been hiding. Chris had been waiting for this moment, and his ship's missile tubes were already loaded with his special explosive packages. The aliens found themselves surrounded by human ships that had appeared out of nowhere. The alien ships were fast, but they were not faster than human weapons. Tom Garcia's plasma cannons reached out across space and touched two more alien ships, turning them into expanding fireballs. Steve Martinez's stealth ship fired silent missiles that hit their targets before the aliens even knew they were coming. Rick watched the battle on his screen and felt satisfied. The Death Squadron had been created to handle situations where regular soldiers would fail. These aliens had made the mistake of thinking that humans were weak and primitive. They were learning that humans could be the most dangerous species in the galaxy when they needed to be. The remaining alien ships were trying to escape, but they were moving slowly because their formation was broken and they were confused. Rick told his ships to let a few of the aliens get away. He wanted them to go back to their empire and tell everyone what had happened here. The battle was over in less than 10 minutes. 14 alien ships had been destroyed and 3 had escaped. The big civilian ship was still floating in space, damaged but not destroyed. Rick opened a communication channel to talk to the people on that ship. A woman's voice answered him. She said her name was Captain Elena Rodriguez, and she was in command of the refugee ship Harmony. She thanked Rick for receiving their signal and coming to help them. She said the aliens had been hunting them for weeks. Rick asked Captain Rodriguez to identify herself and tell him where her ship had come from. Her answer surprised him. She said the Harmony was a colony ship that had been launched from Earth in 2157. She said they had been establishing settlements in this part of space for 30 years. Rick realized that there were human colonies out here that Earth did not know about. These people had been living in space for decades, building new homes on distant planets. And now an alien empire was trying to kill them all. Rick Hayes listened to Captain Elena Rodriguez explain how her people had come to be so far from Earth. The colony ships had been launched in secret decades ago when Earth's government thought it was too dangerous to tell people about space travel. Thousands of families had volunteered to leave Earth forever and build new homes among the stars. Elena told Rick that there were dozens of human settlements scattered across this part of the galaxy. Small cities on distant planets where children had been born who had never seen Earth, farmers growing crops under alien suns, scientists studying new worlds that no human had ever walked on before, but 3 months ago the Korth Empire had found them. Elena said the Korth were an old alien race that controlled hundreds of star systems. They saw humans as an infection that needed to be cleaned out of their territory. The Korth had been hunting down human settlements one by one and destroying them completely. Sergeant Lisa Morgan was listening to everything Elena said while she worked at her computer station. Lisa had been kicked out of the regular army for being too smart and asking too many questions that made her commanders uncomfortable. In the Death Squadron, her job was to figure out how enemies thought so that Rick could kill them more efficiently. Lisa pulled up information about the alien ships they had just destroyed. The computers on the Vengeance had been recording everything during the battle. She found something that made her face go pale. The alien ships had weapons that were designed specifically for attacking civilian targets. These were not warships built for fighting other military vessels. They were ships built for hunting down and killing regular people. Lisa told Rick that the Korth ships showed evidence of attacking multiple human settlements. She had found traces of human technology in their weapon systems, which meant they had been studying destroyed human colonies to learn how to kill humans more effectively. This was not a random attack or a misunderstanding. This was planned genocide. Rick felt anger growing in his chest like a fire. The Death Squadron had been created to protect human interests when regular soldiers could not do the job. But this was bigger than just protecting one ship. This was about protecting an entire branch of humanity that was being hunted to extinction. Rick told Danny Brooks to prepare the boarding pods. Danny grinned and started getting his explosive charges ready. He was going to board the remaining alien ships and take prisoners for questioning. But Danny's idea of questioning prisoners was different from what regular soldiers did, Rick told Steve Martinez and Nicole Webb to extract every piece of information they could from the alien ships. Before Danny blew them up, he wanted to know everything about the Korth Empire. How many ships they had, where their bases were, how they communicated with each other. Rick told Tom Garcia to keep his weapons ready. If any of the alien ships tried to escape or fight back, Tom should turn them into space dust without asking. Questions first. The boarding action began 30 minutes later. Danny Brooks and his team shot themselves across space in small pods that attached to the alien ships like metal parasites. They cut through the hulls with plasma torches and climbed inside wearing full combat armor. The aliens inside the ships were not expecting humans to board them. The Korth were tall and thin with gray skin and 4 arms. They carried energy weapons that could kill a human instantly. But they had never fought against someone like Danny Brooks. Danny moved through the alien ship like a force of nature. His combat armor was covered with explosive charges, and his helmet had cameras that sent everything back to Rick on the Vengeance. The aliens tried to stop him, but Danny had been fighting in close combat for 15 years, and he was very good at it. The Korth discovered that humans did not fight the way other species fought. Most alien races in the galaxy had rules about how to conduct warfare. They had traditions and honor codes that limited what they could do to enemies. Humans, especially the humans in the Death Squadron, did not have those limitations. Danny captured 3 Korth soldiers alive and brought them back to the Vengeance for questioning. Lisa Morgan had prepared a special room for talking to alien prisoners. She had studied alien psychology, and she knew how to make them tell her what she wanted to know. The Korth prisoners were terrified when they realized they were on a human ship. They had been told that humans were primitive animals who could barely use tools. They had not expected to be captured by soldiers who fought with such precision and violence. Lisa questioned the prisoners for 6 hours. She learned that the Korth Empire controlled over 300 star systems and had been expanding for thousands of years. They saw themselves as the rulers of the galaxy and any other intelligent species as threats to be eliminated. The Korth had found the human colonies by accident 3 months ago. A Korth exploration ship had detected human radio signals and followed them to a settlement called New Austin. The Korth had destroyed New Austin and everyone living there, then used the information they found to locate other human colonies. Lisa discovered that the Korth had already destroyed 12 human settlements. Thousands of people were dead, including entire families who had been living peacefully on distant worlds. The Korth were planning to wipe out every human presence in their territory. But the most important thing Lisa learned was that the Korth Empire was not expecting any resistance. They thought humans were isolated on Earth and had no way to fight back. The Korth fleet that had attacked the Harmony was just a small hunting group. The main Korth military was busy conquering other star systems. Rick listened to everything Lisa had learned and made his decision. The Death Squadron was not going back to Earth to report what they had found. They were going to find every human settlement in Korth territory and protect them. And they were going to teach the Korth Empire what happened when someone tried to commit genocide against humanity. Elena Rodriguez contacted Rick from the Harmony and told him that there was a large human colony called New Denver 3 days away. The colony had 50,000 people living there, and they had no military defenses. Elena was afraid that the Korth would attack New Denver next. Rick told Elena that the Death Squadron would escort the Harmony to New Denver. He was going to make sure that no more human civilians died while he could prevent it. And when the Korth Empire sent more ships to attack human colonies, they would find the Death Squadron waiting for them. 3 days later, the Harmony and the Death Squadron ships were approaching the New Denver system when Nicole Webb's sensors detected something that made everyone on the bridge go quiet. A massive fleet of Korth ships was coming toward them through space, moving fast and with clear hostile intent. Rick Hayes looked at the sensor readings and counted the enemy ships. There were not 17 this time. There were over 200 Korth vessels, including massive dreadnoughts that were 5 times larger than the Vengeance. The Korth Empire had decided that humans were a serious threat, and they were sending a real military fleet to deal with the problem, Captain. Elena Rodriguez called Rick from the Harmony, and her voice was tight with fear. She told him that New Denver had 50,000 people living across 3 planets and dozens of space stations. Most of them were families with children, scientists who studied alien plants and animals, engineers who built machines to help humans live on new worlds. They had almost no weapons and no way to defend themselves against a military attack. Major. Chris Kelly was already running calculations on his computer. He looked up at Rick and shook his head. Even with the full Death Squadron fleet, they were looking at odds of more than 100 to 1. Chris said that conventional military wisdom would be to evacuate as many civilians as possible and retreat to Earth. Rick turned around and looked at his officers. Danny Brooks was checking his explosive charges and grinning like he was looking forward to the biggest fight of his life. Lisa Morgan was studying the enemy fleet composition and trying to find weaknesses they could exploit. Tom Garcia was running diagnostics on all the weapon systems to make sure they would work when the shooting started. Steve Martinez was already planning stealth attacks against the enemy fleet. Nicole Webb was scanning for ways to use the local environment against the Korth ships. These were people who had been kicked out of the regular military for being too dangerous, too violent, too willing to break rules when lives were at stake. Rick smiled the kind of smile that made enemy soldiers surrender without fighting. He told his officers that conventional military wisdom had never applied to the Death Squadron. The Korth Empire wanted to exterminate human colonies, but they were about to learn why that was a very bad idea. Rick opened a communication channel to all the Death Squadron ships. He told his captains that they were going to defend New Denver against impossible odds. He reminded them that they had volunteered for the Death Squadron because they were the kind of people who did not know how to quit when the fighting got hard. The plan Rick came up with was insane by normal military standards. Danny Brooks was going to rig every asteroid in the New Denver system with explosive charges. When the Korth fleet tried to use the asteroids for cover, they would fly into a minefield that would destroy ships faster than they could count them. Lisa Morgan had found weaknesses in Korth fleet formations by studying their attack patterns. The Korth ships stayed close together and relied on Central Command to coordinate their movements. If Tom Garcia could target their command ships with precision strikes, the rest of the fleet would become confused and easier to destroy. Steve Martinez was going to use his stealth ship to attack the Korth fleet from unexpected angles. His job was to cause as much chaos as possible while the other Death Squadron ships focused on the main battle. Nicole Webb would coordinate all the attacks from the Vengeance, making sure that every shot counted. The preparation took 18 hours. Danny Brooks and his demolition teams worked without stopping to place explosive charges on hundreds of asteroids. Each charge was connected to proximity sensors that were programmed to detect Korth ship signatures. When a Korth ship came too close to an asteroid, the explosion would be powerful enough to crack a planet. Tom Garcia modified the Vengeance's weapons to fire concentrated bursts that could penetrate Korth ship armor. He had studied the wreckage from their first battle and found that Korth ships had weak points where their energy shields did not provide full protection. Lisa Morgan worked with the New Denver colonists to evacuate civilians from the most vulnerable areas. She also set up communication networks that would allow the Death Squadron to coordinate with the colony's small defense force. The colonists had mining equipment that could be converted into weapons and engineering crews that could repair damaged ships. When the Korth fleet arrived, they expected to find a defenseless human colony that they could destroy without resistance. Instead, they found the Death Squadron waiting for them with a battle plan that no sane military commander would have attempted. The battle began when the Korth fleet tried to surround New Denver's main planet. The lead Korth ships moved toward what they thought was an asteroid field that would provide cover for their approach. Instead, they flew into Danny Brooks's minefield. The explosions lit up space like a chain of miniature suns. Korth dreadnoughts that had survived hundreds of battles were torn apart by explosions that created shock waves powerful enough to damage ships that were kilometers away. In the first 10 minutes of the battle, The Death Squadron destroyed 30 Korth ships without firing a single weapon. The surviving Korth ships scattered and tried to regroup, but Tom Garcia was ready for them. The Vengeance's modified plasma cannons reached out across space and found the Korth command ships with surgical precision. Without central coordination, the Korth fleet formation began to break apart. Steve Martinez's stealth ship appeared behind groups of isolated Korth vessels and hit them with surprise attacks before disappearing again. The Korth had never fought an enemy that used stealth technology, and they could not adapt their tactics fast enough. Rick Hayes realized that the Death Squadron was actually winning. The Korth Empire had sent a massive fleet to destroy human colonies, but they had not expected to face soldiers who fought without rules or limitations. The Death Squadron was not just defending New Denver, they were dismantling an alien military force that had conquered hundreds of worlds, but the battle was not over yet. The largest Korth ships were still intact, and they were beginning to target New Denver cities directly. Rick knew that if those ships reached the planet, thousands of civilians would die in minutes. It was time for the Death Squadron to do what they did best: fight the enemy up close where their superior firepower would matter most. The final phase of the Battle of New Denver began when Colonel Rick Hayes made the decision that would be remembered throughout the galaxy for centuries. Instead of continuing to fight the Korth fleet from a distance, he ordered the Death Squadron to board the enemy flagship and capture it intact. The Korth flagship was a massive vessel called the Empire's Wrath. It was 3 kilometers long and carried enough firepower to destroy an entire planet. The ship was protected by energy shields that could stop most weapons, and its hull was made from metal alloys that were harder than anything humans had ever created. Rick suited up in his personal combat armor, which had been modified far beyond standard military specifications. The armor could survive in the vacuum of space, underwater, or in temperatures hot enough to melt steel. It was powered by a miniature fusion reactor and equipped with weapons that could punch through tank armor. Danny Brooks prepared his boarding pod with enough explosives to level a city block. His job was to blast a hole in the Korth flagship's hull large enough for the Death Squadron assault team to enter. Danny had been dreaming about this moment since he first joined the military and discovered that he loved blowing things up. Lisa Morgan stayed on the Vengeance to coordinate the assault and provide tactical support. She had studied everything the Death Squadron had learned about Korth ship designs, and she knew exactly where the flagship's command center would be located. Her job was to guide Rick and his team through the alien ship's corridors to their target. Tom Garcia continued to provide covering fire from the Vengeance's weapon systems. Every time a Korth ship tried to help their flagship, Tom's plasma cannons reached out and reminded them that they had their own problems to worry about. The battle around New Denver was still raging, and the Death Squadron could not afford to let their guard down. Steve Martinez used his stealth ship to attack the flagship's escort vessels. His job was to make sure that no other Korth ships could interfere with the boarding action. Steve had become very good at making enemy ships disappear without warning over the years. The boarding action began when Danny Brooks fired his pod directly at the flagship's command section. The pod hit the alien ship's hull, and Danny's explosives tore a hole large enough to fly a small ship through. Atmosphere rushed out of the Korth vessel, and emergency lights began flashing as the ship's systems tried to deal with the sudden breach. Rick led his assault team through the hole that Danny had created. The inside of the Korth ship was dark and filled with strange smells. The corridors were too tall for humans, and the gravity was lighter than Earth normal. But Rick and his soldiers had trained for fighting in alien environments, and they adapted quickly. The Korth crew tried to stop the human boarding party, but they had never fought enemies like the Death Squadron. Rick moved through the ship's corridors like a force of nature, his armor's weapons cutting down alien soldiers who got in his way. Behind him, Danny Brooks placed explosive charges on important-looking equipment, while the rest of the assault team secured their path to the command center. The Korth were taller and stronger than humans, but they were not more violent. They had rules about how to fight, and they expected their enemies to follow similar rules. The Death Squadron had no rules except winning and protecting human lives. When Korth soldiers tried to surrender, Rick accepted their surrender. When they tried to fight, he killed them without hesitation. Lisa Morgan guided the assault team through the flagship's maze of corridors, using the ship's own computer systems. She had learned enough about Korth technology to hack into their networks and turn their own security systems against them. Doors that should have been locked to keep humans out instead opened to let them pass. The battle through the ship took 2 hours. Rick and his team fought their way past automated defenses, Korth Marines, and security robots that fired energy weapons capable of melting human armor. But the Death Squadron had been chosen specifically for their ability to fight in situations where normal soldiers would fail. Finally, Rick reached the flagship's command center. The room was huge and filled with control stations that looked like they had been designed for creatures with 4 arms. At the center of the room stood the Korth Admiral, a tall alien with gray skin and eyes that looked like black marbles. The Admiral was wounded and bleeding from several cuts on his arms and face. Around him, the bodies of his bridge crew lay where they had fallen trying to defend their ship. The Admiral held an energy weapon in 2 of his hands, but he did not try to use it when Rick entered the command center. Rick walked up to the Admiral and removed his helmet so the alien could see his face. He wanted the Korth leader to remember exactly who had defeated his fleet and captured his flagship. Rick's face was covered with scars from 15 years of fighting, and his eyes were the kind that had seen too much death. Rick told the Admiral that his empire had made a mistake. The Korth had assumed that humanity was just another primitive species that could be exterminated without consequences. But they had been wrong. Rick said that the Admiral was going to return to his empire and deliver a message. The message was simple. Earth protected its colonies and its people. Any alien force that attacked human civilians would face the Death Squadron and soldiers like them. Rick told the Admiral that humanity had settlements throughout this part of the galaxy and every single one of them was under Earth's protection. The Admiral tried to speak through a universal translator device that one of his dead crew members had been wearing. His voice was weak and filled with pain, but Rick could understand what he was saying. The Admiral asked what humans really were. He said that his people had conquered hundreds of worlds and destroyed dozens of species, but they had never encountered anything like humanity. Rick smiled one last time and told the Admiral that humans were the ones Earth sent when mercy was not an option. He said that if the Korth Empire tested humanity's protection of its colonies again, they would discover what extinction actually looked like. Captain Elena Rodriguez watched the end of the battle from the bridge of the Harmony. The Korth fleet had been completely destroyed or had fled back to their own territory. The flagship was now under human control, and Rick's team was using it to broadcast a message to every Korth ship in the sector. Elena transmitted a report back to Earth describing what the Death Squadron had accomplished. She recommended that Earth immediately expand its colonial protection protocols and send more military units to defend human settlements. The galaxy was much bigger and more dangerous than anyone had realized, but humanity was ready to face those dangers. Admiral Lisa Carter received Elena's transmission at the Titan 7 monitoring station. She smiled as she began drafting orders for additional Death Squadron deployments throughout human colonial space. Humanity had announced itself to the galaxy not as explorers or diplomats, but as the species that would answer any call for help with overwhelming force. The word spread quickly through the Korth Empire and beyond. Humanity's most dangerous soldiers were now patrolling the stars, and they had a very simple policy regarding threats to human civilians. No survivors, no exceptions, no mercy for anyone who tried to harm innocent people under Earth's protection.